Hello, I'm Chris from Team 10464, the Bionic Tigers, out of Loveland, Ohio, and today I'm going to be giving a presentation on the control system for kickoff. So, you have two main options when you are deciding what to use for your control system. You have either two expansion hubs in a phone, or one expansion hub and one control hub. There used to be a third option called modern robotics, but that is no longer legal, so make sure you don't do that as long as you want to be able to compete. With both these options, you technically could remove a control hub, so use just one expansion hub in a phone or just a control hub. However, the issue with this is you would only be able to use 4 motors, less sensors, and less servos. And every year, all the good teams will use up all 8 motor ports and usually wish they could have another. So, and I have never heard of a team that only uses 4 motors making it past states. So I highly cannot emphasize this enough. Do not make the mistake of just using one expansion hub or one control hub. So I am going to talk about the differences between the two real fast. So if you're using the expansion hubs plus phone method, it's been in use since 2016, so it's older, more established. It interfaces with the motors and sensors. That's what the expansion hub does. And the phone has the program on it. It's an Android app that communicates with the hub. And that's what you program. You program the Android app. So with this method, there is a connection between the phone and the hub. So you plug in a micro USB into your phone and then a mini USB into the hub. This is a very common failure point. The micro USB on the phone wears out pretty quick, and the mini USB has no real retention mechanism, so it pretty easily slides out. It also requires you to charge your phones, and that's a bit of a hassle. On the other hand, it can be cheaper because the control hub is more expensive and you can get phones pretty cheap. But if you get a half-decent phone for FTC or a non-used phone, they do end up being about the same price. So if you're using the control hub and adding an extra expansion hub, hopefully, it is newer, so there is the potential for more issues and stuff. It was piloted last year in some areas, not Ohio, but other areas, and it's legal for all areas this year. It's really nice because it's an all-in-one solution. Basically, the phone is integrated into the expansion hub. That gets rid of that point of failure. It also improves loop times and a few other performance boosts in a lot of cases. Now, that's something that generally you don't have to worry about and really doesn't make a difference, but it's something you should know. So if you're wondering which should I choose, unless you are really strapped for cash, I would go expansion hub and control hub. I mean, even if you are strapped for cash, the value that you are giving up for the maybe 50, 75 bucks you could save in a best case scenario is not worth it, because losing a match due to a disconnect between the failure point or even wasting meeting time troubleshooting that is just not worth it. So here's a picture of the control hub and expansion hub. So as you can see, they are basically the same. And these, I'm going to go over some of the connectors now. So you got these yellow connectors, which are XT30 connectors. They're labeled battery very clearly. So that's where you plug a battery in. And there's also a battery out, so you can daisy chain control hubs and expansion hubs together. So because you're only allowed to have one battery. So you plug the battery into this one, and then you have a cord coming out of here, going into here. You also have motor ports and encoder ports. So that's what these are. And as you can see, you only have 4 per hub. This one is the port for the motor, and this one is the port for the encoder. And if you don't know, an encoder is basically just a device that is on the motor that will read how far the motor has gone. So it's really useful for repetitive movements and autonomous. These two ports you can ignore. Unless there is something really weird, there is no legal use for them in FTC. I believe they are just debugging ports for Rev. These two ports are used to connect an expansion hub and a control hub, or two expansion hubs together. So you will get your cable and you'll plug it into one of these ports, and then it'll go into the port on the other one. These are I2C ports, which is a protocol to communicate with sensors. And so you can buy sensors that will interface with this. These ports are for digital sensors, and these two ports are for analog sensors. There's also 6 servo ports and 2 ports that just output straight 5-volt power. So the only use I know of for this in FTC is to power a either your phone. I guess you could wire that into a charger, because phones use 5-volt power, or into a USB hub if your camera that you're using is hungry for power. So another thing that's separate from those is the driver station. So this has to be a phone. So you have to get another phone. Even if you're just doing the control station method, you have to buy another phone and use the driver station app on an FTC legal phone. And you can find these in Game Manual 1. There's a whole list of them. They're not that many. The phone will have 1 to 2 controllers plugged into it. So use a micro USB to USB Type A dongle. It's called an OTG adapter. And you can either plug that into a USB hub, so you can get 2 controllers, just plug it directly into 1 controller. The most common controller is this Logitech controller. Also, in Game Manual 1, you can see the list of legal controllers. The DualShock controller is now legal this year, which is interesting, and I will be curious to see if it's used in competition. One thing that's essential to know is you cannot modify or program the driver station software. In fact, the way most people get it is just by downloading it onto the phone straight from the App Store, because you cannot modify it. So there's no point in doing anything else other than just downloading on there and using it like that. If you're wondering which phone to get, I would recommend the Motorola G Plus, which is currently unavailable. When this comes back into stock, I would recommend it. Otherwise, look for one of the other phones that has 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi connection. And that is super important because you want access to that extended spectrum. That's really the most important, and arguably the only important consideration in deciding which driver station phone to get, is making sure it can communicate over the 5 gigahertz spectrum, because that opens up more bandwidth for you, and at a competition with saturated networks, you really want to have that option. Also, if you are going to do the expansion hub and phone method, would recommend using the same phone for both the driver station and the robot controller. And also note that if you decide not to do that, and let's say one of your phones is only has the 2.4 gigahertz band, and one of them has 2.4 and 5 gigahertz, they can only communicate on the 2.4 gigahertz band. So, speaking of Wi-Fi, 2.45 gigahertz, the way that the driver station connects to either the control hub or the robot controller phone is through Wi-Fi pairing. So Wi-Fi Direct is used for the two-phone approach, and the control hub is pretty simple. It just creates its own Wi-Fi network that the driver station then connects to. So I'm going to kind of walk you through this a little bit. First thing you need to do is go into your phone's settings and turn on airplane mode, and then turn the Wi-Fi back on. Then open up your driver station app and click on these three dots where this menu will pop out, and then you can click settings, and then you can click Wi-Fi Direct. Sorry, what I meant to say is then you can click pairing method, and you will have the option to choose either Wi-Fi Direct or Control Hub, so choose that based on which option you use. Then you click pair with robot controller, and if you chose the Wi-Fi Direct option, you will see a list of Wi-Fi Direct devices that you can try to pair with. And the filter just means that it'll only give you devices where the name of the device matches your team number. So you can turn that off if you haven't set that up yet. And then you go, if you are using the control hub, when you click on connect to a device, you will get this to pop up, and you will click on this and go into Wi-Fi settings and choose the network of the control hub, enter the password, which is password, and then go back. And if that's the control hub, then you're done. As for the expansion hub, once you've started the Wi-Fi Direct, you need to then look at your robot controller phone and click accept on that to finish the pairing process. So let's talk a little bit about Wi-Fi while we're on the subject. So different channels have different amounts of different devices. So you are able to change the channel, and at competitions you're usually assigned a channel to operate on. That's because if there's too many devices on one Wi-Fi channel, connections will be poor and they will drop out. This is why 5 gigahertz is important, because it gives you more channels to work with. So also need to talk about configuring your devices. So that's motors or sensors or whatever. So Rev's new documentation and the first wiki are great. I'm going to put links to both of these in the description or the comments. You can also just Google it, it'll probably come up. And you can contact us if you have issues at bionictigers10464@gmail.com. So first thing you need to do when configuring is settings, configuring, new configuration, and then your devices will pop up. So there's something called the expansion hub portal. So that's like what the main expansion hub has, and you can have up to 2 expansion hubs under it. You click on one of those expansion hubs, and you can click on either motors or sensors, whatever you want to do, and then you'll get a list like this. So for motors, you can choose what type of motor you have, and then you enter the name of the motor. Now it's important to remember or write down what that motor name is, because when you try to connect to it in your code, that's how it'll be identified. You also can add sensors or digital devices like I'm doing here. Name in a sensor sense. It's a touch sensor in this case. Then when you're done, you just click done, save, and enter a name. So one of the most common problems with the control system is disconnects. So you always want to try to avoid them, because otherwise you can lose matches, not because your robot isn't good, but just because your robot is sitting there because something has gone wrong. So make sure all of your connections are strain relieved, meaning that they have support before the connector so they're not like being tugged on. Also make sure that they won't come undone, so zip ties are often good for this. Make sure your batteries are full, that usually helps. Make sure the Wi-Fi spectrum is not too saturated. This is important more for if you are not assigned a channel or if you are just practicing, because if you're at an in-person competition, they will usually assign you a channel. There's also static to consider. So one option to take care of static is to use this. This is the rev resistive grounding strap. It is the only legal way to take care of static electronically. Basically, it's the only extra device you can use to control static, and it basically just goes into one of your expansion hubs and has a resistor in it, and it goes to the frame. And hopefully that resists the voltage from an electrostatic shock and grounds the robot. You can also, if you are doing remote events and have control over the field, spray anti-static spray on the field. Vacuum it sometimes works. Wipe down your robot with dryer sheets. Also, make sure that there aren't any frayed wires that would lead to a short circuit. So you have a few different options for programming. For programming when using the control system in FTC, I'm just going to talk about them real fast. So there's a kind of sliding scale between the three options. So the most easy to use but least versatile option is blocks. On-bot Java is in the middle, and Android Studio is the hardest to use but the most versatile. So blocks programming is great for people completely new to programming, small programming teams who don't really need to share code, and middle schoolers who may have less time to devote, or for whom blocks just makes more sense. It's really easy to visualize what is going on in your code, and one of the downsides though is you have to be connected to the robot in order to program. One of the upsides to that is you don't need anything more than a program than a Chromebook to program, which is good, especially if you have a lower budget and you don't want to spend on team computers or laptops, and no one on your programming team has a personal laptop that isn't a Chromebook. You do have to remember to back up the programs, but that's not too hard. You can't do super fancy stuff like use other people's code or do too much with classes, but you can do well with just block coding. Don't let anyone tell you differently. You can definitely win competitions with block programming, write somewhat complex algorithms with block programming. Wizards.exe won the Inspire Award in Relic Recovery with just using blocks programming. Now there is a point of diminishing returns, because when you get to writing more complex algorithms, it will be annoying to use blocks, and it is usually slower to use blocks. So at that point, you may want to start trying to learn Java or Android Studio, but it is possible to do those complex things, or even win with those without using those complex things and just using kind of normal blocks programming. On-bot Java uses the Java programming language. It exposes some stuff that's not seen in blocks, and it's good if you are already familiar with Java or similar languages. You can create classes that are called by others fairly easily, and like blocks, you need to back up your code and can't use other people's libraries, but you also only need a Chromebook to program with it. It also takes care of the speed thing. If you are writing, more math and complex stuff, it's often faster to do that with on-bot Java than blocks. Your last option is Android Studio. It also uses the Java programming language. It's similar to on-bot Java, but much more powerful because it can use other people's libraries for stuff like vision or control or whatever. One of the best features is collaborating with others. With GitHub, it has features that'll help you write code like autocomplete and syntax highlighting. You need a Windows or Mac or Linux, and has a bit of install time. It's not, I mean, it's just a one-time thing, so it's not too bad, but note it. When installing these other libraries, you will have to you edit some Gradle files, and you need to physically plug into the device, so connect a cable from your laptop or computer to either the robot controller phone or the control hub in order to download the code. So before I talk about how to connect to a computer, I will just say that in most circumstances, it's best to start out with blocks, and then after you're comfortable, graduate to either Java, OnBot Java, or Android Studio. You can use OnBot Java as kind of a transition, but in my opinion, the extra or the lack of ease of use does not make up for the versatility that it gains from being OnBot Java is not made up for in the lack of ease of use. So it's good for transition, but not for long term. And if you already have experience, or if you have experienced programmers who can teach your new programmers, Android Studio is the way to go. So depending on what you're using, you connect to the control system over either Wi-Fi or USB. So once you have connected, and this is for Wi-Fi, to the network, you will enter this IP address for the control hub and this IP address for the phones, and it will take you to a page where you can manage them and do OnBot Java programming and blocks programming. If you are using the control hub, what you have to do is enable developer options on the phones, and then connect via USB with a computer that has Android Studio. And this is assuming that you have the app in your Android Studio, and then you can make your changes and download it by just clicking the run option. That basically concludes my presentation. Like I said, it was pretty basic, pretty simple. It's really just meant to be a launch and off point. If you have questions, feel free to contact me at bionictigers10464@gmail.com. And I will have links to those resources I mentioned to help you out. Thank you very much.